Welcome back to the Rob Manus Show. We've got a great guest this week. It's balloons, more balloons, and Chinese spying. Why are we seeing so many at high altitude? With the shoot down of that Chinese surveillance balloon that collected on multiple U.S. high value targets as it traversed the country, it seemed like all of a sudden more high altitude unknown objects started to appear, and some of those were shot down. What's going on here? Well, civilized countries, we've been flying high altitude weather balloons and other devices for decades. So, why does it seem like we're now seeing more of these high altitude platforms, or HAPs, as I've learned they're called? And they have different capabilities. To help answer these questions, my guest this week is Mr. Mark Bayliss. He's a member of the Federal Communications Commission's Technology Advisory Council, or FCC TAC, and founder of and president of Visual Link, a company that's a leader in developing and deploying advanced internet services. As a member of the FCC TAC, he helps the FCC identify important areas of innovation and develop informed technology policies supporting America's competitiveness and job creation in the global economy. Mr. Bayliss, welcome to the Rob Manus Show, sir.
Hello, Rob.
Yeah, I
Glad to be
appreciate
here today.
I appreciate you joining us. You know, I get questions every day. I have about 500,000 followers on different social media platforms, and as one of their go-to national security people, since I'm a retired colonel, I get asked all the time, "What is going on with all these balloons all of a sudden?" And really, I was a bit surprised too. But really, when I started looking at it, it looked like to me that it was because the focus was now on it, because you can actually research the flight plans on these things and
Oh,
go
yeah.
back multiple decades, and you know where they're at, right?
Correct. Yeah. All the major launches that have been sent in the stratosphere from 1947, their flight plans, logs, everything are online. And some of these objects up there are quite big.
Yeah.
Quite big. I mean, we've had, I think the largest one that was launched in the last 2 years was 1.2 tons, the payload size.
Hmm.
And so that's a large object.
That is a very large object. But before we dive too deep into those HAPs, can you just tell the crowd, since some may not be familiar with the FCC Technology Advisory Council, what do y'all do?
We look at cutting edge technology, new things that are coming out, and then we try to identify which ones of these new cutting edge technologies will have the greatest effect on both the U.S. economy and and those that we identify, we want to make sure the U.S. has a leadership position. So we work on coming up with suggestions for policy changes or ways that these technologies can be used or better implemented. And so we work on our policies and our decisions. We've done fairly well. I've been at the TAC now. You get reappointed every 2 years. I've
Okay.
been reappointed now since 2010. So I've been through 3 presidential administrations.
Hey,
Act-
President Obama signed my retirement papers, and I had been through presidents since Jimmy Carter. So
Yeah, yeah.
I
So,
hear you.
little bits of changes, but our mission stays the same. Um,
Exactly. So you founded your company like 30 years ago.
yeah, correct.
I'm making a big presumption that you're on this council, or asked to be on this council, because of your expertise in emerging technologies, especially focused on internet access. Is that an
Uh,
accurate assumption, or?
Accurate assumption. Yeah. I mean, we're all supposedly leaders in our field,
Right.
you know. Um, and mine is internet and internet policy, and I've got a good background, and I'm a well-rounded background, so I fit in.
Yeah.
I'm sort of the person who's not quite the expert in everything,
Hmm.
but the people who are on there who are very focused experts in one piece, I'm the connector in between it.
Okay. Oh, connectors are important. That's one of the things that I do these days, and did in the military too, quite frankly.
Yeah.
The Now I have to ask this, Mark, and especially with today's cultural societal environment. But I would be I think if I were on the TAC, it would be very non-political, is what my presumption is. You don't have any issue. You guys don't deal with that kind of stuff, do you? Just focus really on
We
technology
are
and policy.
the only time that we've run into anything that became rather political was net neutrality,
Hmm.
and that was that became. But we're neutral. We're completely neutral. Technology is technology.
Exactly.
So
Technology's technology. I mean, you can't put societal and cultural
yeah,
stuff. Well,
yeah,
you probably could these days with some of
yeah,
the AI that kind of thing, but
yeah.
it's not
I'm
going to
on
make
the
it work better.
Yeah, I'm on the AI committee as well.
Oh,
So
that's a whole other show. I'll have to get you back on that because this
yeah,
GPT
yeah,
thing that I keep hearing
yeah.
about is got me curious. So I call them HAPs, high altitude platform. I've done it in my research for the show. I've seen high altitude platform systems. Uh, so why is the TAC involved with balloons? I guess this is the
Well,
first question I'd like to see
the
answered.
big thing that we were looking at is the high altitude platforms have always had promise since Rand Corporation did a study in the Gulf War, yeah, about the use of high altitude platforms for communications in theater of warfare. Low latency, only 12 miles up in altitude, quick deployment. It made ideal communications platforms, and a lot cheaper than satellites, and the latency's better. And if you wanted to do a low Earth satellite that would have the ability for handheld devices in field to communicate,
Hmm.
um, it would have to be in just at the edge of the stratosphere or the metasphere, yeah, not stratosphere, metasphere, and basically dragging the outer part of the atmosphere. So the problem is, in order to stay at that altitude, you have to be at 24,000 miles per hour, which means that each satellite would only be able to communicate to someone on the ground for 90 seconds before it would be out of range. So that's why Elon Musk and the others need tens of thousands of satellites in order to get ubiquitous coverage, because the satellite that you're talking to for 90 seconds is gone, and another one has to come over, and there's a continuous swap. Where with HAPS, you can get the same benefit as a geosynchronous satellite that stays in one place, but that geosynchronous satellite has to be 24,000 miles in orbit above the Earth.
Right.
So that adds, almost at the speed of light, almost 2 seconds in latency.
Yeah.
So in other words, if I talk to you, as you've seen reporters who are talking at satellite, one person talks and they have to wait till the other person hears it. And so in internet communications or controlling of drones or any type of targeting system, that doesn't quite work.
Yeah, yeah. I'm familiar with TACSAT voice communications and other communications
Yeah,
streams over via satellite, and yeah, I mean the latency issue is I think the number one issue really
yeah.
when you're talking about things like what I used to do in my professional life.
Okay.
Uh, Go ahead.
And that's where the HAP comes in, because the HAP is this happy medium. There's a layer of the atmosphere, the stratosphere, where the winds are only between 5 to 20 miles per hour,
Hmm.
with maximum gusts of 40 rarely. So that makes it an ideal location to put what would be a geosynchronous platform in the atmosphere that is only 12 miles up. So the ability for it to communicate to cell phones, handheld devices is ideal, and you do not have the limitations of like SpaceX, which is 112 miles in orbit. So it's 100 more miles in altitude.
Right.
So better communications, lower latency. The key thing where everybody's having a problem is having the HAP stay in one place.
Yeah. Well,
That's
yeah, that's one of
that's the holy
that's
grail.
one of my questions is but the first question though is Okay, we've used high altitude systems for a long time, both in the atmosphere and obviously on low Earth orbit and on geosynchronous orbit. Uh, but are there new capabilities, these new systems that the average citizen is just now starting to become aware of, that we're
Well,
dealing with? I'm assuming that you guys on attack have identified this the good stuff that we want, that the United States and the people of America would like to have as an operational technology. What are those?
we're in a race. We're in a race with we're like in another space race with China,
Yeah.
Europe, all the other countries. Saudi Arabia is putting tons of money into development of different groups. The Chinese are heavily in operation of it, and what's really fueled it is basically intelligent highway programs. What's happened is now that we're going to electrical vehicles,
Hmm.
uh, what's happening is that we're not getting fuel tax from electric vehicles.
Right.
So we have a fair tax now that you put more fuel in your car, the more you drive it, the more fuel you burn, your taxes increase to how much mileage you go, what's
Right.
your gas mileage of your car. With the electric cars, there's no taxation. And so most of the states are quickly seeing millions of dollars per month of road taxes disappearing.
Hmm.
And the only way to do that would be to put taxes on electricity. But that would have an effect across the board on everything else. And so, since you can't identify when the guy plugs his car into his house or whether he's heating his house, you can't separate it. And that's something there's technology we're working on in that as well, that
Hmm.
we hope to have in a couple of years. But for the intelligent highway system, self-driving cars, they can't see around corners. Some corners, if there's a
Right.
hill in the way, um, a flagman standing in the road telling the car to go on the wrong side of the road and drive against traffic, and then it self-driving cars have yet to be able to figure that out. So
Okay.
with the intelligent highway system, we're looking at putting LiDAR systems at blind turns and feed that information back into cars, as well as being able to monitor how much the electric cars drive per month and being able to then tax the electric car owner for the road taxes. The gasoline cars are already paying tax, but the electric cars aren't. So
Yeah.
there has to have some way to be a fair tax base. In order to do that, in the United States, we have a total of 179,000 towers currently in the United States that we're using for 4G and 5G.
Okay.
Most of them are being upgraded to 5G. We need, in order to have enough cell towers in the United States, in order to the coverage that we need
Hmm.
850,000 additional towers.
Oh, wow.
And China needs far more than that. And so does India. And so do all these other countries.
Hmm.
In the United States, we've determined that just for the permit process for 850,000 towers, for the time that it's taken to get to 179,000 towers, would take us 212 years. So can't get there from here.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
So each one of the HAPs at altitude can replace the equivalent of 100 cell towers.
Okay.
So basically, you have a large site on ground with your links going.
Hmm.
So instead of having small bits of 5G equipment spread out every basically 5 miles,
Hmm.
you have one big site every 100 miles going up to a HAP, and then the
Yeah.
HAP can then bring down. The coverage is better too because you're coming from top down, so you're not having interference from trees, hills, earth that absorbs the
Right.
radio frequencies.
Yeah. It's like being on orbit, direct line of sight.
Yeah,
So you
yeah,
have much better
and it's
reception.
and it's only 12 miles. And the
Right.
interesting thing about it is the first say 5 miles of that, there's no moisture in the air,
Okay. Yeah.
so it doesn't affect the radio signals.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
so we only really have to go 6 miles. If we
But
were
we're basically talking airspace wise above 60,000 feet.
60 to 65,000, yeah.
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 There's not a whole lot of aircraft that are flying up there.
There's not a whole lot of aircraft that they're flying. It's going to be, it's not rated right now, but it's going to be what's called upper part E.
Right.
But upper part E
Exactly.
hasn't been established yet. So
Hmm.
the stratosphere is really just a uncontrolled Wild West right now.
Right. Now, does this change? A lot of people were talking about how the U.S. doesn't really have sovereignty at the altitude the Chinese balloon was at. That's not
It,
technically correct when you
it's
look at
it's
airspace definitions.
scientific applications and non-scientific applications have been transversing over countries without any issues for decades.
Right.
Um, I mean, we've lost probably 200 to 300 balloons since we've started launching them,
Hmm.
in the U.S. I mean, there was just one a few months ago. There were two a few months ago that were launched that went from near Los Alamos, and they ended up over the Gulf of Mexico, going over multiple countries in Central America,
Hmm.
over the Pacific, and then eventually they ended up in Hawaii.
What was their
Uh,
intended destination, though?
the intended destination was Hawaii. They were trying
Oh,
to
okay.
steer them, but they had to go all the, they're trying to ride air currents,
Right.
and so,
Uh, uh,
they launched,
that
they launched two, and both of them ended up going completely different directions, but they both ended up near where they were supposed to go.
And that's the challenge, one of the reasons I'm glad you decided that you could come on the show, because maintaining station, or maintaining an orbital station of along a small circumference, so that you have the appearance of one cell tower,
Yeah,
effectively, and maintaining altitude. So maintaining over the geographic location your desire to do and maintaining the altitude. I mean, that is a challenge that balloonists have been dealing with for decades, and you just touched on my main concern, and I think the Chinese balloon highlighted it once again. And the other three that the government really doesn't want to talk about what they shot down. I suspect they were experiments of some sort or scientific. But So have those two problems been solved by these new high altitude platforms that we're talking about?
that is, they're getting closer. There are lots of
Okay.
technology that people are trying, lots of implementations, and that's one of the reasons you're seeing a lot more things in the air,
Right.
because everybody's doing tests, and
Hmm.
they're trying to work on these systems. They send them up, they see if they work. 9 out of 10 times it doesn't work.
Right. Well,
we
and
haven't
two,
we haven't had any great success yet,
yeah.
but there's promise.
Okay.
Yeah, the balloon that was from China looks, if you follow its flight path, um, it looks like they lost control of it somewhere after it left mainland China and hit into the Arctic Ocean
Yeah.
up by Alaska. I think
Yeah.
that's where they lost control of it. That's what it looks like. Um,
Yeah. Because its track after that, coming down from Alaska and then over to the East
yeah,
Coast, it's very, very familiar to an old aviator like me.
yeah.
It's
It
called
just
a
started. It
wintertime
was just
jet
going.
stream.
It was going with the jet streams.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was just lost.
Wintertime jet stream.
And NORAD by itself had been monitoring it, and it wasn't transmitting. It was
Right.
dead.
Right.
It was just a dead object floating. It might have still had some flight control systems trying to, navigate it, but there was no control stuff left. It was probably
Hmm.
trying to go back to wherever it was supposed to be staying.
Yeah, is
Because the
that
whole
you think
idea was
that's
to,
why it maintains station for a day or so over a particular area in Montana?
and even then, that, I mean, if you look at the plots, that's probably the best that we've ever gotten with Loon so far. I mean, most
Yeah.
of them are lost. We had one. There was one that was launched from, where was it, on 9/22, last year, and that was unfortunately a really bad one. And that was Fort Sumter. Launched the payload there, got to 125,000, and it lost control of it. But even worse than that, when they went to the automatic termination to bring the payload back by parachute, the system failed. So we dropped it from 125,000 feet.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah. Then the balloon kept going, and it slowly descended uncontrolled,
Yeah.
For a good bit. This happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Now my estimate as to what happened with the other balloons that were shot down, there's a stratospheric research station that is used for the European Space Agency.
Mm-hmm.
And they launch about 500 to 550 of these launches per year. And they normally drift from Finland. They normally drift and they go over the Arctic Ocean or the North Atlantic. And they, depending on the winds, they go north or they go straight or they go south.
Right.
And so the payloads from there are fairly large. There's radio telescopes. There's all types of options, monitoring of solar winds, radiation, sampling of atmospheric layers at that point. There's a lot of research that's been done looking for changes in the stratosphere from all the rocket launches that have happened with both moisture content and other types of, I guess, exhaust or pollution, as you want to put it, and how it might be affecting the stratosphere of the currents. And some of these are big payloads, and some of them are small payloads. But typically what happens is once they get over the land again, these payloads are dropped by parachute in remote areas. They're usually recovered, and then the balloons typically start to deflate, and they usually will go out over the Pacific or crash somewhere in Canada, or they have no real weight to them.
Right.
Yeah. And so my guess is what they shot down were just after the payloads were dropped.
Okay.
They were just stratospheric science balloons that were probably coming from the European Space Agency.
Wow, it's fascinating.
They drift over us all the time.
Yeah, it's fascinating to talk to somebody that's been monitoring all this stuff. And go ahead.
Yeah, what really surprised me is when they were saying, well, they might be extraterrestrial. and that just really cracked me up. I was like, wow, for one, how can a balloon enter the atmosphere? That's an interesting one.
Well, they kept putting out information about one of them that it was hexagonal in shape, or I think they were octagonal in shape, and I think it even one of the descriptions even had like a metallic looking object, which the balloon materials are silvery, whitish silvery type material most of the time.
Yeah, they're trying everything. They're trying Mylar. They're trying different shapes to be able to work on control stuff. I mean, there's it's
so it's not just the military that's working on this, though, right?
Oh no, no.
I mean, I've heard some big name companies are trying to come up with this.
Yeah, I mean, we did reports. The TAC did a whole report on HAPs, looking at the communications part. And you've got you have Google, you have Facebook, you have Northrop Grumman, you have Boeing, you have Airbus, you have 3 aerospace companies in Europe. I can't imagine how many. Japan had a $12.5 million program, but we're testing on it. South Korea spent hundreds of millions of dollars so far in their HAP programs. I mean, it's pretty much global. There's not a lot going on south of the equator. Australia's got a program that's going, but Australia's been working with Airbus on their program. And the Airbus program is rather interesting. No one ever hears about the Airbus program. They have what's called Zephyr. And Zephyr is a very lightweight, because when you get to the stratosphere, the atmosphere is at 1%.
Right.
So the density isn't there. So in order to fly there, you have to have extremely big wings with a lot of lift.
Right.
So you'd have a stall speed in regular atmosphere of about 4 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So the Airbus has built what they call their Zephyr. Boeing built one too. Boeing sort of backed away from the program for the time being. They're just sort of waiting. But Airbus is active. The DoD is putting money into it. Australian government, Saudi, and it's a 245-foot flying wing.
Wow.
With basically 27-foot diameter propellers.
Solar powered.
Solar powered. All the wings are solar energy. The entire craft only weighs 400 pounds.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I mean, one of the tricky parts would be the takeoff and getting it up through the high wind areas.
Oh, and that is the problem. That is the problem. It takes almost an entire day to slowly circle to altitude.
Right.
And any winds that it encounters, it has to have ideal conditions to get up there. And even worse, it has to have ideal conditions coming down, which is very hard when you're trying to set altitude duration records. You really can't choose when you're coming down. And so they've lost.
Why wouldn't it just be able to stay up indefinitely if it's solar powered?
Well, that's the problem. They've reached 29 days is their longest so far. Well, you have a lot of things that are happening. You've got the solar power, but then you have the nighttime you have to carry through, and you also have a problem of you have to store that energy, and you got to store that energy at basically 70 below zero temperatures.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's right.
the efficiency of batteries at that temperature is very poor.
Right.
So it's they're working on it. It's one of these things. Well, if we heat the battery, we get more storage. But wait a minute, if we heat the battery, we use more power.
And you're going to use more weight too.
Yeah, and more weight. Everything starts. So we've got to 20. They've gotten to 29 days.
Watch the rest of this interview on Red Voice Media Premium using the link below. Completely uncensored and ad-free. Not a member yet? Try it for $1.